Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-hosts Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is Kira Davis, editor-at-large at RedState, host of the Just Listen to Yourself podcast, don't forget a podcast, and author of the new book, Drawing Lines, Why Conservatives Must Begin to Battle Fiercely in the Arena of Ideas. Kira, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charles. It's great to be back. Hello, Shamika. Hi, Will. Glad to be back.
Yeah, back. I think we're up to, we're almost at 100 episodes. We only had 2 other people who could say back. So,
oh, really?
Back.
Okay.
Yeah, great to have you back. Your buddy, Nick Searcy, was one.
Oh, great.
And I forgot who the other, maybe the other co-host can remember.
We had his wife.
Yeah, we did.
Oh. Todd A.
The capital.
I can't wait to tell him that you did not remember.
We did do 2 episodes on that race thing. Shamika loved him.
Shamika, you and Nick would be bosom buddies. I promise you.
Oh, they've hung out together since the episode.
Oh no, they are. Nick is the best. He's not nearly as salty in real life as he is on.
I mean, could you possibly be that salty? I don't know.
No, it's a character, but he's really great. I've known Nick for a while. He's the best.
Right. But welcome back, as you said.
Thank you.
Great to have you. And I reached out because I wanted to talk about the book again, Drawing Lines. You have a new book, and what I thought it was interesting anyway, but I thought it was different because it's described as a message to conservatives and how they need to fiercely fight. And I was like, I thought this was Kira. This was the intelligent conservative, sticking true to her values, but always, giving people their argument. Like me, I felt her, we were, simpatico there. Give people their argument, don't assume the worst, reach across the aisle. And this was a little different. So why the different approach?
I'm still for all those things, but I'm for all those things with people who are willing to meet you in that aisle, but what happened was school. What happened was COVID and my kids not getting to go to school, my son losing his senior year of high school, my daughter losing 2 years, and then living in Southern California. When we did go back, we went back to all kinds of insanity. I mean, tampons and pads in the boys' bathroom for all the transgender kids that are apparently in there, and CRT in the classroom, but even worse, a highly sexualized curriculum that was aimed at converting kids to an LGBTQ, all the other letters agenda, really. And I think it was when I realized that there was a group of toxic males and their cohorts who were determined to sort of erase femininity, erase womanhood, and erase my daughter's existence. I thought, this is really, I've had enough, and I don't know if conservatives have had enough, but we need to really make a decision about where we're going to stand up, because I think a lot of conservatives are just the mind your business, go to work for your family, come home, enjoy what you've earned, and then do it all again the next day. And that's great. That's how America should work. But in the meantime, we've left the culture behind, and we've done that thinking, well, it's so distasteful. We just don't want to be a part of it. And I understand that. But then what we did is we let it run all the way over us. And now we don't run the institutions that educate our future voters, that hold into place the legs on this stool of democracy, on the stool of this republic, and we're lost. And it's because we just haven't been aggressive enough. So I talk in the book about how there's a time for everything. That's biblical. And we certainly all want to be in a peaceful time, but we're not in a peaceful time right now. We're at war. We really are in a battle for this culture. It wasn't a war we chose. It was one that came to our doorstep, and perhaps we can go back to a peaceful time, but now is not a peaceful time. Now we're at war. So conservatives need to pick a space, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. It's not going to look the same for everyone, but you need to pick a space, get in where you fit in, and then start making some noise.
Shamika, any thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's kind of what I've been saying. Like, I think I was pretty content, maybe just talking a little junk here and there, you know. Now it's like I feel like I have to say something, because people that I thought would kind of, you know, grab the baton and run with it are not. And so it's like I don't have a choice but to say something. And even though my children are older, thank goodness, I don't know what I would do if my baby wasn't turning 18 in a couple weeks. But I still care. I still care what's being done to the children. I have a bonus son who is 4, and I am worried, like, once he starts public schools, what will he be taught? You know, right now I'm fine. He's in daycare. He's going to the same daycare all 3 of my children went to. And so I know he's being taught, you know, the right things. He's not getting confused with gender, and he's not being taught, you know, you need to carry around a tampon in your wallet. And so, but once he goes to school, like, I know my ex-husband is not going to homeschool him. I don't think his mother is going to homeschool him. And my kids are even worried, like, Mom, what's going to happen to him when he goes into public schools? And so I'm like, I have to continue to fight. Although I'm, you know, my kids are pretty much in the clear, I still got to speak up and speak out, because those that I thought would are not.
Yeah.
Will, before I get to you, I just want to make one point, Shamika. Everything you said made sense, but you said pretty soon the boy is going to be going to public school. It ain't just public.
Yeah.
It's school.
It's school. It's
and the more expensive
everywhere.
the school is, the worse off it is.
And that was one of the things I decided to do was run for office. I ran for my school board, and I didn't win. But one of the things that I found hard to convince my constituents of is that all of this mattered, even if you don't have your kids in public school. Because I live in a very wealthy suburb in Southern California. A lot of people who don't like what's going on in the public schools just send their kids to private school. I can't tell you how many doors I knocked on and they were like, well, we go to private school, or I'm not even going to worry about voting for school board. And it's like, well, you know, this seeps into your private school as well. You know, put a stop to it here, and then you don't have to deal with it when it's there. A lot of people don't understand that.
Will?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question, and this is kind of a setup question, because I mean, I looked through, we usually get the draft of the book, so I think I know what your idea is. But so when you say conservatives need to fight and need to get into some of these spaces, I mean, like, the gap is real and it's there. I mean, like, I write about the media and academia a lot, and both of those are about 90% slanted toward the left right now, which is really crazy. I mean, to put that in context, I think the military is a 62% toward the right, something like that. But I mean, so what's your idea about how to take some of that back? Like, in secondary education, you can run for the school board, then that's a great idea. I think a lot of parents out there need to basically do that. But for higher ed, for any of this stuff, national media, what's the way to start fighting? What do you think?
I'm so glad you asked me that, because this is actually what this book is about. I actually lay out all of the major cultural issues of our day. So I talk about whatever it is. I think I start off with women's rights and the transgender issue, but I move into critical race theory, school, marriage, family, all of the things that I feel are under attack these days. I make arguments against them, I help people think through those issues, but I always end every chapter with, here's what you can do. And I want to make one thing very clear to people. I don't expect you to run for office. That's not for everybody. I know that's one thing you can do. Now, my seat was open this year and no one else was stepping up. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And that's what I did. But you don't have to do that. There are places you can get in right now where you can make a difference. What I'm encouraging people to do is not think of the battlefront as one major front, right? Where, because sometimes you'll go on Twitter and you'll see, like, especially conservative talking heads, like, if you're not paying attention to the ESG conversation. You're part of the problem. Everyone's got to get in this one lane and be concerned about this one thing. And it's like, well, I don't have all of that bandwidth to be concerned about every area. That you need to pick where you fit in. So not everybody needs to deal with higher education, but someone like you, well, who is involved in higher education, you take what you know and you work to make little changes around you. So it could look like things like you getting on certain committees in your school, in your academic institution. It could be like you volunteering to be on the, I don't know how it all works, but volunteer to be on, let's say, a hiring committee for the DEI instructor that's coming in, or volunteering to be something, a chaperone for the students in some event, not leaving those spaces for the bombastic, unhelpful progressives. I don't even like to call them liberals anymore. Liberals I can deal with. Progressives are a different species, but you like sort of getting in. It's long term. That's the other thing I talk about in this book. It's taken us a long time to get here. It's going to take us a long time to get out, if that's even possible. Republicans, especially when you're talking about the party apparatus, need to have a long-term vision. We don't have that right now. Everybody wants a result right away. But, one of the things is when the liberals started infiltrating higher education many, many decades ago, and now we're here. So conservatives need to start doing that. They need to start getting in where they fit in. I tell people, maybe you don't run for office, but maybe you go to a training, like a school board. Moms for Liberty does boot camps for if you want to run for school board. If you're not going to run, go. They're free. Go and take one, and you can learn how to help someone who's running for school board, because it's a lot of work, even for a smaller office like that. If you live in a small town, go and get on your library's board of directors, and then you get to see what the books are in your library. I met a teacher recently who is a librarian at a school in Washington State, and she is a conservative, and the school is, like every other public school on this side of the country. And she said she was buying my book. She was at an event, and she bought my book. And she said, I'm not allowed to say no to any of the books that come through the library. And we have the craziest books in our middle school library. But I am allowed to put whatever book I want in the library. So what I do is I go and buy up different conservative books, and I put them on our shelves, and I put them in prominent places. And then I host a volunteer discussion group once a week on lunch break, and kids that want to come in, we talk about books, and I always pick a conservative book to talk about. That's a little thing that she's doing right where she is. The book's full of all kinds of other ideas. Going to your meetings, showing up, starting a blog just to report on what your local city council does. A lot of times they do so much because they no one is watching. Sometimes just the very act of being there and just being able to see what they're doing can stop them from doing crazy things. So there are no excuses, and I'm sort of tired of people saying, well, I can't do this, or I don't have enough time to do this. I don't accept that as an excuse anymore. No one has time anymore. Life is busy. Modern American life is really busy, but we really cannot afford to let any more time slip past us. We are on the cusp. I don't believe it's hopeless, but I do believe that we can't retreat anymore. There's no more yardage behind us.
Yeah, one thing very quickly I think people do have to understand is that a lot of this is going to be generational or close when you talk about kind of these cultural fights. It's very different from politics, where kind of the length of the field is 4 years. I mean, like in terms of higher ed, you have to get a PhD to teach in a good college. And I look every year at the number of, the phrase that came to mind was brothers, but black men and women that get PhDs. But as part of that, you look at the total numbers, and in a lot of fields, it's like 40. So, I mean, if you want to change higher education dramatic, and that's 40 for everyone, not for any ethnic group. So if you want to change higher ed dramatically, I mean, a lot of people are going to have to go to school for 10 years in this esoteric stuff, because almost every field is pretty woke. You get these crazy debates you'd never expect about the race of the ancient Egyptians and so on. So, I mean, someone to influence that one way or another is going to have to go get a PhD in Egyptology. So I think there's that one level where you're doing this stuff day to day, and you're absolutely right. just going to a local city council meeting. I thought about running for alderman. It's a great way to keep them honest. And normally there's a room with 8 guys in suits and no one in it, at least in a
Right.
mid-sized city like the one I live
And
in.
they vote like that.
Yeah, they do. They just
Yeah,
close the
they
door
vote
and they
like
vote.
nobody's here. Oh, well, I
Yeah.
guess we can vote for this race for ourselves. I'm glad you said that because this is the one thing I was really trying to impress upon my county GOP when I was running for school board. I live in a fairly conservative county in California, but our school board is very, very liberal. And that's because the GOP has really not looked at it as a battleground at all. Even though we have the second largest school district in the state, we only come in behind LAUSG, which has like $1 billion budget every year. We're $500,000 every year in this one district in South Orange County. And I was telling them, you need to look at the long game. You should want to own this school board, not just because there's a lot of powerful things that happen with the school board. They deal with a lot of money. They give out a lot of contracts. There's the teachers unions, all of that whole cabal working together. You are educating your future voters. And our California is lost because we're going on year 50 of educating in an extremely liberal fashion. And so we're going to need to start that chain reaction at the bottom. We're going to have to start from scratch again. We're going to have to educate the future so that it's not as hard to win elections, but that is going to take 10, 15, 20 years. It's not going to be in the next 4-year cycle. Another thing that can happen at the higher education level, Will, is something that's a little more immediate is lawfare. I think lawfare is going to be a huge part of wrestling back common sense. Look at what just happened in Stanford with that, the judge who went and was shouted down, and then the dean, the DEI dean herself, he asked her for help. And what did she do? She joined in with the pitchforks, but he didn't let that go. He's suing the school. And he should. And what happened was the dean of the law school said, oh, whoa. Okay, this is bad for business. We're Stanford Law School. We place kids in lucrative jobs and internships when they leave here. That's part of what, we sell our education on. And if judges are not going to take our clerks because it's these brats acting up, that's bad for our brand. So we're going to discipline this dean. We're going to come out in favor of free speech. Just the act of that judge going public with what happened to him and then following through with legal action made it a real difference at that level. So there's stuff that can happen now too. It's going to take people getting a little brave.
Well, there's so many problems here, obviously. Another one is Will started off talking about the different areas that the other side has control of, right? You talk about education, academia, the media Will mention, but then also entertainment. It runs the gambit. But another problem is that part of your book is to compete in the battleground of ideas. And from what I see, again, I stopped watching the news about a year ago because it's so crazy. You end up hurting yourself more than you learn anything.
Mm-hmm.
But we've kind of gone from people having different views on an issue to, I don't know where this battleground on ideas, where that battleground is, because they don't want to talk about ideas at all. Just think about it. When you talk about, Kira, you mentioned something on social media. So if you think about the fiercest battles, the yelling on Twitter, the talking heads in the media, and you don't even try to think about who's right or wrong. You just think about what they're talking about. I don't know. We're going to seem like old people now, because if I think back to, when I was like in my early 20s and turn on the news, they were all debating these weird things like taxes and zoning if it's local, or whether they should build a new school or not, or military issues. Again, don't watch much news, but when I do see it, it's all race, gender, transgender, all this other kind of stuff. It's like they're all arguing. They think it's legislative, they think it's political, but they're all arguing cultural things, right? No one's really talking about any issues that's going to fix any of the problems that people claim they want to fix, regardless of what side is they're on. So if as you get into this battle to fight this arena of ideas, aren't the conservatives mostly going to find that arena empty?
It's pretty
Nobody's there
sparse
speaking
right
up.
now. I'll tell you that. It's a lot more sparse than it should be, which is another reason I wrote the book.
Right.
I was like, you can't be leaving it up to your pundits that you see on TV, your favorite Twitter personalities to do battle on social media. That's fun, but it doesn't move needles. But
Right.
I like that question, Charles. Where is the battle space exactly? Another thing that I address in my book, I lay it out. Where is it? It depends on where you choose. It depends on what your lane is. You have to find your lane. You know, this is my lane. Media is my lane. Expression, communication, that's my lane. That's what I do. I ran for office and, you know, put some effort into that, but being a politician isn't really my lane, but I do know how to express ideas and communicate. But your lane might be that teacher who buys books and puts them in her library. That might be your battlefront right there. Just that 450 square foot room every day, 1 hour a week on Fridays to have lunch with those kids. Maybe that's what your battlefield is. Maybe you are retired and you're a grandparent and you're not quite sure what to do with this next phase. Maybe you are a grandparent who visits her kids at school, her grandkids at school, and by the way, pops into the school library to see what books are in there. And then just lets people know, or lets your school board member know, you know, maybe that's where your battlefront is. I talk a lot about entertainment really needing to be a huge leg of this. You know, conservatives need to stop raising politicians. We don't need any more politicians. Encourage your kids to get into the creative arts. And I know we all want our kids to make money. I mean, my son's studying film right now in Chicago, and you know, I would feel so much better if he was studying dentistry, but that's not what he wanted to go into. But I've also raised a son who's very thoughtful, and I don't know that I would label him a conservative, but he's certainly no lefty, and has good sense, and so far has been able to keep his good sense about him through his time in college. He's going to go out into the world, try to make it in Hollywood, and take all of these traditional ideas that my husband and I have raised him with him, and those things will go into the art that he creates. It might not look, it's not going to be like a Christian movie or, you know, that kind of thing, but his sense and his foundation will come through whatever he creates. And that's what we have to remember here. I think doing things like fighting for the nuclear family. Maybe you are if you're in church, and you have a testimony, or you have like you know, a heart for married couples. Maybe you counsel other married couples in your church. You know, you just offer that space. Or maybe I ran an after school program for a little while in Gary, Indiana, Charles, or your hometown. And that was like, for a little while, that was the space that I occupied. It didn't change the world, you know, but it changed maybe a few lives there, a few kids. My husband and I supported a scholarship in Gary where we got kids out of the public school and sent them to private school. We gave them a full ride. There were several students that, you know, I don't know, are those kids going to change the world? Maybe not, but the chance to take a breather from public school for a few years may have changed the very trajectory of their lives. So where is the battleground? The battleground is wherever you are. You're not neutral, is what I'm trying to tell everybody. Where you stand, the ground you stand on, be it at your school board meeting or out front talking to your neighbors or in academia, whatever ground you stand on, you have to claim it. You have to claim it.
Shamika, do you think that there's an echo chamber problem? I mean, obviously, Kira's right that many people they think it's somebody else's job to fight this stuff, right? But then when you get people to actually wake up and speak out against it, I know it's easy, and that's probably why they end up doing it. But I find a lot of people cutting off their friends and family who don't agree with them and all that kind of stuff. And then they end up only, even if they're doing some of the things that Kira's talking about, but they're only talking to people in that pundit circle, in that conservative circle. But I say this all the time that I just don't think with busy lives, most people know. I mean, they know some of the things, they hear the headlines, but they don't know how bad this stuff is, how entrenched it is, how deep it goes into schools, all this kind of stuff. I know when I tell my friends, they're shocked. So there are some people you can probably get not to become conservatives, of course, right? But you can get them to understand how bad this problem is and how, in the long term, it would be bad for the country. But you can't if you're only talking to that small circle of people. Do you think that's the case?
I do probably for some people, but it seems as if conservatives aren't really the ones that cut other people off. It's kind of the other side that,
Right. Well, but they may not cut them off, but they may just say, "Well, I'm going to stay friend with my liberal cousin. I'm just going to only talk about barbecuing."
Yeah, I guess if you're a punk or you're weak or that's just not your personality, maybe, that you just won't say something. But it's like for me, if you follow me on social media or if you're around me in person, I'm going to say something. And for the most part, people don't really, I think a lot of people like, oh Lord, here goes Shamika, but they're not gonna really try to battle me much because I think a lot of people are starting to kind of see that there's something to it. I think maybe some years ago people thought I was nuts, but I'm seeing so many people, like classmates or family that may sneak and send me a text or DM and say, thank you for speaking out. I'm seeing what you're talking about. Or, somebody reached out to me some months ago and said, oh my goodness, what's wrong with Shamika? And I've been looking and, I don't think anything is wrong, And so I'm having people kind of reach out to me, secretly and say they can see exactly what I'm talking about. So I think if you just, keep those lines of communication open and just be yourself, some people aren't going to do it because that's not who they are. For me, that is who I am. When I see something crazy or if it doesn't look right, I don't care where I am. I'm going to say something and people know that about me. And I think they trust that about me. Even if they have been confused, some years ago, it's really been like, gosh, I don't understand why she's, voting right or leaning right, but I know her to be honest and upfront. And so I think when you make genuine connections with people, that'll take you a long way. And so people just need to do that. It makes me upset when I hear people say stuff like, oh, there's no need of talking to the Black community because they're going to vote the same way all the time. And, yes, they primarily vote the same way all the time.
Just did it in Chicago.
Okay.
Unsurprising.
But
well, that's also because only like 14% of the people in the city voted, though.
There's a whole, there's a whole.
Oh, it's
when people say like the Black vote is all Democrat, like one point I would make there pretty much all the time is that less than half of Black men even vote.
Yeah, the Black vote
it's a little higher for I'm sorry,
women.
I said the Black vote is a non-vote.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. Like I think a lot of Black that's where the Republicans actually have a chance. So if you're talking just in terms of the political parties, I mean, when you say there's no potential base there, if 83% of the people aren't voting, and that was true in poor white and Hispanic neighborhoods in Chicago too. Like I'm from Chicago and outside of the Gold Coast, I mean, there aren't that many very wealthy areas. I mean, Charles might add a couple of like near north or something, but I mean, like you have a huge pool of people that you could potentially bring in. 80% of the people are so disgusted or at least bored with both parties, they don't even bother to walk down to the church. Like there's one in the center of every Chicago neighborhood and take 5 minutes and cast that ballot. And that's who you're talking to. Right. You're not, if you're the GOP, you're not talking to like the Chicago Teachers Union. You're going to get fucked off on that. But there are all these other people that you can reach out to. So I would say, I mean, you're probably not going to devote most of your efforts to going to the hood as a Republican. But if you're starting at 6%, it wouldn't be hard coming from a sales background to flip that to 18.
Do you
and that
guys
could shift some elections.
do you
Go ahead,
guys have you guys ever talked to Devin Jones out there in Chicago? He runs the South Side GOP.
Uh-huh.
I've had him on Just Listen to Yourself. Great
Yeah,
I think I've
guy.
actually met him socially.
Ben, I was at this past a week ago or so.
He's a great guy. He wanted to start a GOP branch on the South Side to do just what you said. Will, just get involved in the community, give people a reason to at least be curious about the Republicans. And he called the national Republic NRCC,
Okay.
and so he could get a certification. They were like, "Oh no, we're not going to support a Republican office on the South Side. That's a waste of money. We might as well just burn the money." And he was like, "Are you not even going to try to reach out to these people?" And they're like, "No, well, there's no strategic value to it." And so he started it himself. But that's one of the things he talks about, how there are people who are there to be influenced, but the Republicans don't see them. They just see that very daunting number of 90% of people, Black people, vote this way, but not that many of us vote, period. And there's a huge distinction between how women vote and how men vote. That is aided a lot by the state of the nuclear family
in
the Black
education,
community, right?
academia.
So single women or single mothers are more likely to vote for more government.
Yeah, for more
Are you booing
money.
single mothers or their votes?
She's booing women
You
voting.
don't have a
get her
daddy around
started,
the home,
Karen.
you can always have an
Don't get her
uncle.
started. I would love to watch it. Fine, we're gonna go. Shamika, could you tell the people your take on women voting? Women's suffrage. Let's talk women's 19.
It was a huge mistake.
Yes.
Really,
and that's
both of you
how I
guys think
feel.
that's hilarious.
I'm really happy that I have my right to vote, but I recall reading about suffrage, and I can't remember the gentleman that said this. If I said his name, you would know it. It's a historical name, but he really opposed the right for women to vote, and he said, if you give women the right to vote, they have two votes, because women just tell their husbands how to vote, and it's true, because
Will, I know you're all about research and the numbers, and I know correlation does not mean causation, but married women do vote more conservative than all the other women.
Well, yeah, I was only half joking with some of those lines, like if you don't have a daddy around, you can always have an uncle. But I mean, like, yeah, if you're in a situation where I don't mean to be crude, but like you're dating a bum ass dude, he leaves, you're dependent on the state. Right. And there are programs like
what about the educated?
What's up?
Why all the women with PhDs voting the same way?
Well, actually, it
really thing.
It depends. So, like, first of all, women do lean more left than men, just in general. I mean, I personally think it's an empathy thing.
Yeah.
Like, I really could care less about people I don't, one, know, and two, like. I just see them as enemies, like beyond spear range or whatever. And like, guys, if you're doing like psychology or political science and you interview men, you hear this a lot. Although guys try to play it down. You don't just want to say like, I don't care. Women, I think in general, do care. So like programs like aid to single moms or the schools overall are more appealing overall to women. And I think that's really healthy, by the way. Men and women are equal but different. But I mean, also like you do have to say, like when you get into like African-American and poor white heavy single mom neighborhoods, like that's where you see like 90% vote for the Democrats. Like there is a difference between that and women in the business sector or something. But for each sector, like all women are more liberal than men. So that's
right, which is why when you look
really
to
novel point.
Right. And you can see the results of this in some European countries. So is it Denmark that has the all-female and all-female government? It's one of the Scandinavian countries, the one we can't depend on, the one you would never want to live in, whichever one that is. It's run by.
No hero is going to be like Shamika. Wow.
Yes.
Virtually everyone I've actually heard seriously say repeal the 19th is a woman.
Yeah. Which is only feminist on this show.
Yeah.
Is
I
real.
would
it's
give up my right to vote to take some of these other women. Right.
We better be
I'm a
careful.
feminist
like,
in the sense that I think women deserve like jobs and orgasms and so on as well as men. Like, but I mean, but seriously, like Jane, for example, my fiance was talking about this once, and she doesn't want to repeal the 19th seriously, but she's like, I get to vote, but so do all these other bitches.
Right.
And it was actually like a direct quote. And she mentioned some of the same numbers that I just did and so on. And I think that's kind of the argument. The one thing I will say about that, though, is like if you're seriously making that argument, that would also be an argument that Jewish people couldn't vote, Black people couldn't vote. And I'm sure there are like 5 Nazis that would be totally cool with that. But like in reality, we're not actually gonna make that a rule that only Caucasian and Hispanic men over 30 can vote.
Maybe it would be nice if we could go to the rule that says like if you don't pay taxes, you don't vote. That feels like that would be solve a lot of problems. But I don't know. I'm just a writer.
Just for if you have a vagina.
Oh,
you know.
Here, any of your other interviews gone like this?
No, and I hope no one hears this. And then it ends up isolated on CNN.
And then here
Kira Davis says women shouldn't vote.
Right.
But a lot of y'all are voting like crazy people out there.
But yeah. So let me try to get it back on track. Yeah, take a sip.
Okay.
The reason, but Shamika made a good point before she dissed all women, but I asked her talking about, do you talk to people, and you talked about how the Republicans do a bad job, and we can go down that rabbit hole across the country, and specifically in Chicago. But I say that because they are wrong. That's the biggest thing. They're wrong for thinking that everybody thinks the same way because of their conditions or where they live and things of that nature. But also, I was saying that people don't really see how bad it is, and when they do, a good percentage of them, not all, easily 60, more than a half, would say, well, I'm not for that, regardless of party. Right. And Shamika was talking about the little sneak text she gets, like, they say you're crazy, but not so much. Well, my friends are surprisingly open about it. I was telling someone the other day that my brother, who's basically a white supremacist now, he's hilarious, but my brother, these are all people in Gary, right? Because he's a gun nut, he's a prepper, he makes a bunch of money, taxes are too high, right? So he's telling me, so this is unprovoked. I just put C's out there to see what they say. So he came back and I said, well, man, he was talking about some gun. I will put it out there, let's cut the ball. So he was talking about how he ordered a silencer for one of his guns. And I was like, you get excited? I was like, yeah, but you got to get a license for this, that, and the other. And he's like, oh, so he's like, well, 3 of them. I was like, excuse me? He's like, it takes it, because he was saying it takes so long. And then he said he got 3 of them. I'm like, well, of course it takes so long. They think you're a hitman. Right? Yeah. So we're joking about that. So I say to him, I said, clearly you don't vote for Democrats anymore, right? Because, with the gun thing. And I'm like, he's like, hell no. He said, but all the guys at work talk like that. He's like, we at work talking around. And it's like, shoot, Trump might be a racist, but I'd rather have him in office than a Democrat.
This is the difference. I'm about to get us back into crazy town. Right. This is the difference between Black men and Black women. Yes. Trump did well among Black men. Right. Among Black women, that is a different story. And it goes back to the provider relationship, to the nuclear family. Mm-hmm. Those are definite correlations that I've seen made in many places, and makes sense if you just stop and think about it for a little while. Women are voting for a partner, right? And we have a lack of cohesive long-term relationships in the Black community. And so they're looking for a partner. That's what they're voting for. Yeah. But men, just like Will said, men aren't emotional. They're not voting with their emotions. They don't give a crap if Donald Trump cheats on his wife or pays off a stripper or maybe is a little bit racist. They don't care. Is he going to keep more money in my pocket?
If I could jump in for 1 second there, that's actually a really important point. And I think there are a couple different inputs to that. Like, one, I think me and Charles both played sports. Like, one element of that is that as a guy, you spend a lot of your early life, if it's normal, with other men insulting you to some extent, with ethnicity kind of mixed up in that. Like the guys on the other team, your sergeant, all of that sort of thing, your girlfriend's dad and brothers. So, I mean, like the whole idea of this guy once said an ethnic insult. Like, I remember that was one of the things against Donald Trump, that once during a vicious argument, he might have said the N-word. And there were people that were like looking for tapes of him in an elevator saying this. And I remember listening to this, like, I really don't give a shit. Like, every time I play pickup basketball, which is less now because I'm 40 and out of shape, obviously. But I mean, like, people will say, nigga, you can't guard me. White boy, you can't guard me. Motherfucker, which I consider more offensive than either of those two. You can't guard me. And it's just, that's kind of that conversation. So those same guys, that mix of like Black, Italian, Hispanic, whatever, men at some plant, when Charles was talking about like his brother at work, those guys aren't going to be horrified that Trump said pussy. So I mean,
Right.
sometimes when you get on Twitter, there's this unrealistic mix of like upper class liberal women and like really simp ass dudes that are having these conversations. Like, I just can't believe it. Well, I can't believe it either. And it's
Yeah,
just sort of
that's
like, I don't
crazy.
believe you. Like anyone that's ever been in the Navy
Right.
can believe
Right.
it. Like it's
They're like,
nonsense.
there's
So
no
that's the thing with Trump.
excuse to ever call someone a bitch. It's like, I don't know. Yeah,
Never?
there is.
Never?
There's
Right.
No, I only use the term for
plenty of
other men.
occasions.
But I mean, like the basic idea that, like, seriously, I was talking about this once. It was an anonymous poll on Twitter, but it was just sort of like, how many of you, like playing James Bond back in the day, have used ethnic insults or terms like that? Like we just mentioned, bitch, motherfucker. I don't even know how to censor those, like the MF word. How many of you have engaged in this kind of thing? How many of you could be canceled? And it was mostly men in the chat, and like everybody said, well, I could. I mean, there's nobody that's really immune from this kind of thing. You just have, and this is one of the great points from the guest earlier. You have a lot of people play acting and pretending. I mean, you have all of these people that are sort of saying in public, like, oh, absolutely never. And then that are quietly texting you guys like, yeah, thanks for speaking up. Thanks for you taking the heat. And
That's what this
that's a
book
big
is.
problem.
That's what this book is about. Actually, I got
Go on,
tired
buy
of
it.
those messages.
Yeah.
Oh, am I on? I'm not on.
Oh no,
I hear
I
you.
was
You
just
said
saying,
you
go out
get
and buy the
tired of those
book.
Oh yeah,
messages?
yeah. I get tired of these messages, right? From people who are like, "I'm so glad you said it," and it's like, I need you to say it too. Like when I was starting to get into the school board race, I got so many messages from teachers who were like, "You don't understand how bad it is inside the union. Like it is so terrible. Like I can't speak out, and they're pushing all this stuff on us." And it's like, there's a lot of good teachers out there, Kira, a lot of good teachers that think like you do and support. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to get these messages anymore. You need to stand up at those meetings. You need to say no in the classroom. Like, I can't do that for you. I'm not a teacher. At some point, you have to have enough guts to say, I'm not, I'm not for this and I'm not going to support it. I just got tired of those messages. So the book really is also about like challenging people to stand up and to stop being cowards. I use this phrase a lot. Make yourself uncomfortable. This is not a time for comfort. This is the other problem. People want to have all their cake and eat it too. I get letters every day. I'm sure you get them too, Charles, from white conservatives who say, how do I talk about race to
Makes
my
me so
black
mad.
friend without,
Right.
them calling me a racist, or how do I engage in the race conversation without somebody
Ugh.
like calling me a racist? And I'm like, you can't. Like,
They're all
somebody
people.
somewhere is going to think you're a racist, so
Yep.
deal with it.
Right.
You have to deal with it.
Right. What are you going to do? Well,
Right.
I mean, we could go on. I don't want to hold you too long, but I got to end on a couple things. One, like many people who come to conservatism in different ways, they also, say I was a liberal at some point. And in the book, you give a lot of thanks to your father-in-law for teaching you the way. And so talk about that journey. And then we got to get into some GI stuff real quick.
From Gary, Indiana. I was a liberal, sort of default liberal my whole life. My parents are, as I like to say affectionately, godless hippies. And I didn't grow up with faith and grew up the daughter of an activist mom. I mean, my mom's Canadian, and she'll still stand out in front of her parliament building with a sign like, screw the government. She's always just like, she's very liberal, but she's still a hippie activist. And I got married. What happened was I got married and moved to Gary, Indiana with my husband, which is where Charles's hometown, and which is where my husband was born and raised. And he had a home there. So I moved in with him and became a part of that inner city community. I had lived in the inner city before, but I never had to really be a part of it. I had things to take me out. I wouldn't have considered myself someone who served my community. But there I had the opportunity to serve my community. We started an after school program. I was really involved in a lot of education work in the city, arts. And my father-in-law was the first Black man who I ever met who openly called himself a Republican and openly called himself a conservative. And he was also a pastor. And I just didn't understand how those things worked, but we would always have interesting conversations, and he would never ridicule me. He would always just gently challenge my ideas, challenge me to think through them. And while that was happening, I was also running this after school program, and I was getting to see how the policies that I always thought that I always supported, like I got to see how they worked up close and personal. And I realized, oh, they don't work. And so school choice is really the issue that made me a conservative, because I was working in the public schools and just seeing how my kids were trapped there. And a lot of them were raised by their grandparents. A lot of the grandparents were illiterate. So I was in the schools for advocating for these students with their teachers and principals who didn't care for them at all. You know, we're Black folks in a Black city. They're going to a Black school with a Black principal and a Black teacher, and and all these are the same people who want to scream black, black, blackity black all day long. But then when it was time to like buckle down and help your Black students, it's like, I don't have any interest in, this is not our policy. This is not how we do things. So Gary, Indiana is where I became a conservative, and school choice is the issue that I pulled into conservatism on. And then as I just developed in my life, just avenues opened up for me to be a communicator of those values. So I definitely credit my father-in-law, Victor, with that conversion.
That is awesome. So in the book, because everybody's going to read it and pick it up, and you think of me when you get to this part, because you talk about that office that you ran where you were helping the kids,
Mm-hmm.
and the cell phone place that it got robbed so often it was a joke. And you talked about how everything was all hollowed out, bad landlords. But then you started describing, I'm listening to it and reading it, and you're talking about how when your husband was younger, he used to go there, there used to be things there, and there was a skating ring.
The roller ring.
Hold up, you're talking about Screaming Wheels. Was it in Tri-City?
Yes, Tri-City.
Down the street from my house.
It was Tri-City. We lived over there in the Bronx on Hanley Street. Yeah. And so it was Tri-City. We had a little frontal office space there.
Mm-hmm. And you paint the picture of the city, and it's all so bad. And you talk about all these things that they're lacking. And I was like, man, that sounds really bad. Then I was like, but it's true. It's
true. And we went back last year. We moved from Gary to California when the kids were young. So my son would have been in second grade. My daughter would have been about
15 years ago then?
Almost 15 years.
Okay.
And we went back last year. And we were visiting Chicago, but we rented a car and drove up through Gary, took the kids through. I couldn't believe that it was
what I tell them. Tell them about the houses.
What houses? It was like,
right?
I kept thinking it's like, it can't possibly be worse than when we left, but it was worse. I just kept saying that, like, how could it be worse? We left because we had invested so much in the city. We really believed in the ability to like make Gary a great place like it once was, but it is deep in the grips of a traitorous Black political class, who will sell out their constituents around every corner just for their own comfort. And Gary has suffered that. Gary, people will be like, oh, it was white flight that ruined us, but it's Black crooks that run Gary. I've been in their offices. I've had things taken from me from them. So
that was 15 years ago. I think that, I'm not saying there are no corrupt politicians now. I think that they're just so deep in it now that no one knows how to get out, right? So it's kind of like Chicago. They elect a mayor that says the right things. They can't fix it because it can't be fixed that way. And then they say, that guy's got to go. And they're mad. And they say, bring in another one of my friends who's a liberal said to me, he's like, I said, I was there a couple of weeks ago. And I saw a sign that there's a mayor's race again. And I know the mayor. And I was like, oh, and he's a government official. I was like, oh, how are these? He's like, man. And he looked around. And I said, well, how do you think that the election is going to pan out? It's like, do you think he should win? He's like, no, he needs to go. He's like, oh, so you like the other guy? He's like, no. I say, I'm gonna be honest with you, Charles. I should write it as a novel, right? So it's like, he says, I'm gonna be honest with you, Charles, as NBC is whispers in the background. And he says, what Gary needs is a Republican mayor.
Yes.
That's what my liberal friend said as he's watching MSNBC. Because they know how bad, and they know when the new guy comes in, he's just going to do the same thing. But people, I don't know how to paint the picture except to say you can go down blocks where there's a house, a nice bungalow, well-maintained, the people are doing nice, a nice car in the driveway, and then all of the houses next to them are burnt out.
That's what it's like where the Jackson House is.
What'd you say?
That's what it's like over by where the Jackson House is. You would think that, oh, the Michael Jackson's childhood house, it's got to be in this really nice area of town and it's very well maintained. It's like a museum. No, it's the straight up hood. And then the house is maintained. And then you just go to the next block and it's just burned out, shelled out crack houses.
And the school's closed now. It was behind Roosevelt.
School's closed.
Now.
There's
6 high schools. There's only one left.
Yeah, that's it. There's 3 schools, I think, left in Gary city limits from kindergarten to 12. 3 schools left. It's
we need to get your book in their hands, and that will turn it all around. Will,
sure.
Any last words from you two?
Actually, yeah, like a quick comment. I mean, there's nothing that'll make you conservative like growing up in the hood. Like, I mean, I'm originally from Chicago. I was born on the South Side, lived most of my early life on the North Side, but in like Wicker Park before it gentrified, like junkies everywhere. Right. Moved to East Aurora, which is right outside Chicago. It's like at the time was a Hispanic slum. Now the city is doing pretty well. It's kind of the anti-Gary. Like they actually did bring in a tough mayor who just broke crime, like cops circling the block every 20 minutes kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I mean, when you see that stuff, like getting on the bus in Chicago in the 80s is something that I wrote about in an essay. Not like it was scary or anything, but there's so much graffiti on the windows. It's difficult to see where you're going. I mean, like there'd be people peeing in the train station, you know, having sex as the night wore on. You know, the city was the murder capital of the country for like a couple of years. I think it's Memphis and Little Rock now that hold those honors. St. Louis replaced us. But like looking at this, like you guys said about coming from Gary, there's just this constant string of excuses like, oh, well, the real problem is racism or something like that. The real problem is this thing deep in the past, the legacy of slavery, blah, 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 blah. And it started striking me, especially since a lot of the criminals in East Aurora were white and Hispanic. They were just bums. Like, wouldn't it be a good idea just to arrest all these junkies that are sitting around in the street? You know, if there's a clash between, say, Black and Caucasian on one hand and Latino gangs on the other hand, wouldn't some control over immigration be one way of stopping this? Maybe legalizing drugs wouldn't work all that well, as you know, you pivot your skateboard around a guy who's passed out on the pavement. So like a lot of those ideas that sound wonderful, you just see them over and over and over again not work. Like even in the schools, the whole idea of, well, we don't need to teach kids phonics. We don't need to teach them the boring white man's garbage. They'll learn to read by, you know, absorbing the energy of the people around them, whatever the argument is, like the whole language logic model. Right. Like it just doesn't work. So you get this crazy stuff, kind of last line, but you get like Baltimore. What? You know, it's a mostly Black city. It's not all that poor when you look at where I live right now in Appalachia. They had 2 years ago, I don't know, there's 13% or 13 kids that could read at grade level. I don't want to exaggerate this, but it was something embarrassing. It was like that percentage of the people were proficient at grade level readers across the whole school system, which gets way more than anything down here in Kentucky. So the question becomes, what are you doing? Why don't we use common sense and look at what the problem seems to be and fix the problem? And I think the right's traditionally been better on that. So I think there's a large audience out there.
I want to tip that to Kira, but I want to add to that he's 100% right. But to answer his question at the end, I would say that I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. By observing, I don't think they want solutions. I think that things have gotten things have gotten so politicized that if I have to let an adult man rape a kid just to stick my finger in the right eye, I'll do it. Or if I have to do whatever I have to do, shut down a city with a bunch of poor kids as a conservative, just to make that Democrat mayor look bad, I'm willing to do it because we are that partisan. And if that's the way you view things, we're never going to find solutions.
Yeah, and both sides do this. Like immediately after the Chicago election, there were all these people, including people I like guys from the Daily Wire or so on, but they were saying things like, bleep that city. Deserve. They got exactly what they deserve. We should. And never
how
send
is that any different
than
what Joy Behar said? They attacked her. How is that any different from what she said?
Well, it's not. That's the thing. Like, if you're a fanatic, you're willing to see any number of people suffer so that your cause succeeds. And while I'm not especially concerned, like I already said, about people that I don't have an investment in, the idea of shutting down a school system full of poor kids to make a point for the Republicans or the Democrats is pretty despicable in that old Roman sense. Like, the light doesn't shine on that. It's bad. So the majority of people that kind of recognize that, like, why don't we just teach the damn kids, should hopefully unify and do that. And I think that's the solution most people actually want out of politics. They want politics to be successful, not a process of people sort of owning each other, but just teaching people.
Yeah, but politics has become religion. And so to question the political agendas or solutions that other people have is to really question their very identity. And so
Heresy.
it is hard to have those conversations right now in a way that does welcome productivity. And the other problem is it doesn't behoove most leaders. And I think in the context of this discussion, we must mean Democrat leaders because they run all of our cities. It doesn't behoove leaders to solve problems. You know, what happens to Al Sharpton's job if racism goes away tomorrow? You know what I mean? In California, we literally call it the homeless industry because there is so much money running through the homeless industry that it encourages people to grow the problem, not solve it. You know, the people who run homeless advocacy groups make $500,000 a year. And homelessness has never gone down in this state. It's always going up. So we're not solving any problems, but we keep throwing money at it. And that's because it is an entire industry that supports thousands of people. Do you know that the homeless people in LA have a union? There's a homeless union, and they negotiate with the city for things like porta potties on the streets on Skid Row and like clean injection sites, and they hold the city hostage until they get these things, which then just turn into another place for people to shoot up, or gangs take over the porta potties and they charge the homeless people money to sleep in there or screw in there or shoot up their drugs in there. So
why don't they negotiate to not be homeless?
Yeah,
then you can't solve the problem. What's little
That's
Miss
my ask.
Again, this is just the most incredible simp shit. Just go down to Skid Row and throw every last homeless dude in the back of a paddy wagon, take him to jail. Then you don't have a homeless problem.
Exactly.
We're not allowed to do that. Do you know that the police aren't even allowed to touch a homeless person's things here? They're not even allowed. No. And business owners
in LA
a
Republican mayor.
Right.
The business owners in LA are not allowed to even.
I would have taken Michael Schellenberg. He's not a Republican. He would have.
I actually have one question about the homeless union. Do the people leading it have houses?
Yes.
That's yeah, okay.
Paid for by the last $1 billion tax that the city of LA passed to solve the homeless problem, because it's just a matter of money, isn't it? We just give more money, we'll have less homeless people. We give more money and have more homeless people. If you're a business owner in LA and there's a homeless person sleeping in your entryway, you cannot do anything to move them. You are not allowed to even hose down this. I swear this is true.
You can set their ass on fire.
You are not allowed. No, you can't set anyone on fire, Shamika. and you can't.
Oops, I dropped my match.
Well, troll bashing, quote unquote.
Accident.
In the Chicago working class neighborhoods in the 80s and 90s, there weren't any homeless people. And the reason is because people would keep beating their asses until they left. No, I formally don't endorse that and so on. But it's not very hard to stop people from literally sleeping on your streets.
If you put a planter, some businesses will put planters, like put a nice big planter in front of their business, right? So that at least a homeless person can't put up a tent, because that's our big problem in LA is tents on the sidewalks.
I was going to ask you that. Yep.
Yeah, and they can't. So what they'll do is they'll be like, okay, we'll put a big planter up here or a bike rack, something just to make it inconvenient to put up a tent. The city won't come out and move the homeless person who just shit in your doorway, but they will come out in 2 hours to fine you for putting the planter in front of your business that discouraged a homeless person from that's how backwards it is.
Now, Kira, I'm sure you'll like this. I don't want to go too far in this. Shamika has a question, but I got to say this because I don't say too many positive things about New York. But even though I'm here, it's not my home, whatever. But I will give them credit. I've been in a lot of big cities. They are the only one that they don't touch the homeless. They don't bother them. They don't do all that. But they drawing lines at tents. So unlike Lower Wacker in Chicago, or Union Station in DC, or LA, or San Diego on that terrible viaduct, there are no tents in New York City.
It's unbelievable that there are people living in tents on the streets in big American cities, and not unbelievable in the sense of how can we have failed the poor. Like everyone I've ever known as a scene kid from a big city who became long-term homeless had a serious drug dependency problem. Like the actual solution to homelessness is to take the junkies and mentally ill people and throw them in some kind of institution they can't leave until their problems are resolved. I mean, it really is very simple. But so like it's crazy that it's so
clean.
hard to say that there are guys camped outside like Plains Indian warriors in every city. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Well, you know where that started. We're forgetting now, time's marching on, and we're kind of forgetting the genesis of that, because this is a fairly new thing to have these tent cities popping up. I mean, when I say new, I mean within the last 15 to 20 years in American society. But now it's common, right, to see a tent city in any major American city. It happened during Occupy Wall Street. So what happened was, remember Occupy Wall Street? They went to wherever down there by the stock exchange, and they put up their tents. Well, tents in city areas and public areas are, or were at the time, illegal. So those protesters were squatting illegally. Well, what did the Democrat governments do? Because conservatives and Republicans were getting upset. They said, well, we're going to change the law. We're going to make it legal for people to camp out. We're helping them with their protests. So most major cities never repealed those laws. And then what happened was the activists, as they started to move out of their protest encampments during the Occupy movement, the homeless people had just moved in. I was in the middle of several very heated Occupy Wall Street protests in different cities at that time. And the one thing you noticed was how many homeless people there were, because they were taking advantage of the opportunity to be able to just set up a tent on City Hall grounds and live, whereas before they would be chased off. So cities like LA, Chicago, Austin, they never repealed those tent laws. And that's why we see the growth of tent cities.
It's ironic though. You got to laugh at the fact that it's Occupy Wall Street, and the one city you can't put up a tent is New York. Shamika, last word. You were going to ask a question. I don't want to ignore you.
And I wasn't going to ask a question. I was just going to give a little advice. When I was younger, my cousin had to come and stay with us. Her mom was murdered, but she would always come to my side of the bed. And she slept with her head like really close to the headboard. And so a lot of times her butt would like be in my back. And no matter what I did or said, she just would not stay on her side of the bed. So I started, my grandmother sewed, and she had one of those little pin cushions, a little tomato where she kept all of the straight pins. I would take those straight pins and put them on my side of the bed in the mattress. And so in the middle of the night, when my cousin would scoot over to my side, I would just take a straight pin and jab her real hard until she got over on her side of the bed. Eventually, she learned how to sleep on her side of the bed. So when they tell businesses that they can't move these homeless people, there are definitely things you can do to train them not to sleep outside of your business. So, might take a little bit, something bigger than a straight pin, but you can definitely train them to stay in front of your business.
Well,
Shamika is hardcore. She just admitted on a national podcast that she poked her cousin, who was suffering the trauma of losing a parent to murder.
She needed to do better. The cousin had to learn.
I was going to say, rarely do I wish that I did not go to the star of the show at the end, and I just ignored the fact that she wanted to say something.
Now she will 100% poke your ass if she needs to train you, and she also believes women shouldn't have the right to vote.
If we didn't learn anything else, we learned that Women should not vote. Well, Kira, it's always great talking to you. We could go on for hours,
Very
but
good.
we have to end it there. She is Kira Davis, editor at large at Red State, host of the Just Listen to Yourself podcast, and author of the new book, Drawing Lines: Why Conservatives Must Begin to Battle Fiercely in the Arena of Ideas. Thank you for holding it up. All I have is the PDF and the audio, which you didn't read. Next time, you need to read.
Sorry. I don't like to read. Reading is for men, Charles.
Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save because I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.